Hello, this is Lecture 3, Along Came a Columbus. Hopefully you get the little joke there. This is an extended one for my 2-day-a-week classes. This is just meant for the last day of this week, and for the 3-day-a-week classes, this is for both Wednesday and Friday. To me, this Columbus lecture is of huge significance and really sets up the modern world paradigm. We talked quite a bit in America before Columbus. We talked about the Paleo Indians. We talked about the Younger Dryas. We talked about the Clovis people, animism, the Phoenicians, the Ericson. We talked about a lot of different things about how America wasn't discovered by the Europeans in the 1400s. And then I wanted you guys to really kind of get outside the box. So with this lecture, we are talking about the Europeans, in particular the Spaniards, and for one individual in particular that we're going to spend most of the time on, Columbus. This is an individual that everybody knows. He is one of the more famous people in world history, and I believe he's very misunderstood. So, this lecture, we're focusing on a few things. Reasons for European expansion, Christopher Columbus, the economic system that he would bring, which is encomienda, Christopher Columbus's importance, and Bartholomew de las Casas, who from here on I'm going to refer to as Bart. All right. So we are in the late 1400s and early 1500s today, and zeroing in on one particular person, Christopher Columbus. All right. I'm going to give you a quote by Bart, and here we go. What we committed in the Indies stands out among the most unpardonable offenses ever committed against God and mankind, and is treated as one of the most unjust, evil, and cruel among them. So, the quote is very dark, all right? What did we commit in this area? What did the Spaniards do that was so horrific to Bart? He called it an unpardonable offense. It was against God and man, and he referred to it as unjust, evil, and cruel. All right. So, but to get into this, what Christopher Columbus would initiate, and the Spaniards, and then after them, the other Europeans that would explore and settle. The first thing is, we're going to talk about the reasons that they came. All right. So this is your first key point, reasons for expansion. All right. There are quite a few, but there's so many, but I narrowed them down to the ones that I really want you all to focus on. All right. One of the main reasons for expansion, or you could also say not just expansion, but exploration or exploitation. So either one of those three words you want to add into that reasons of EXP is fine. But the first example is a population explosion. All right. Europe had a huge population explosion during the late 1300s and on into the 1400s, after the Black Plague had reduced the American population by more than half in many historians' eyes. They would repopulate quickly, And as they repopulated, they would run out of resources. They'd run out of land. They would run out of materials. They would run out of wealth. They would run out of food. So they needed to expand. Since they were growing so rapidly, the little areas that they lived in could not sustain them. Another one is a basic human idea of wealth. We always want more. Everyone wants more. So the Europeans wanted more, all right? So wealth encouraged them to expand. Also, trade. All right? Trade is another major thing. Throughout the 1300s and 1400s, they had been creating land routes and sea routes in a growing fashion. They were trying to find more and more civilizations to trade with. Food, supplies, anything and everything. Also, another one that we had to bring in is technology. Technology has two parts. We have social technology, and with social technology, we have things like double ledger bookkeeping, and also bureaucracy. As the Europeans expanded around the globe, bureaucracy plays a big point. A king or a queen or an emperor could not run everything on a daily basis. They needed people on the ground around the world to do these things for them. So they would have people in their different locations around the world running these colonies. Another thing is maritime technology. With maritime technology, we get a lot of new things, but some of the most important ones are the astrolabe and sextant. These are little pieces that allow for longitude and latitude. These are pieces of technology that allow the Europeans to expand and go around the globe. All right. We have population explosion. We have maritime and social technology. We have wealth. We have trade. There's more. Another important one is nationalism. In the modern world, this has become a major thing. You guys are living through it and experiencing it. You see it on hats every day. MAGA, Make America Great Again. This idea, though, is nationalism, and it's nothing new. It's been around for a very long time. We go anthropological with this. We start thinking of us versus them. My family versus their family. My tribe versus their tribe. So, around this time that we're moving out of the Middle Ages and into the Enlightenment and later into the Scientific Revolution let me rephrase that. Moving out of the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment and later into the Scientific Revolution. The idea of nationalism becomes a big thing. Spain, England, France, a lot of places become countries. And over time, in a modern sense, they do this. And nationalism pushes us versus them. The countries, the kings, the queens, the aristocracy, everybody pushes that our country is richer, more powerful, and better than the other countries. All right? So it's this us versus them amped up and focused on a country. So the Spanish are pushing that we are going further, we are stronger, we are more powerful, we are creating colonies, we have more wealth, we are number one. Spain is the greatest. And Columbus would be a part of that, this idea of nationalism. All right. Another big thing is religion. As the Europeans move out and start exploring Africa, Asia, the Americas, they notice that a lot of these places lack Christianity. These places lack Christianity completely. So the Catholic Church goes along to convert and save souls. So this becomes a major push. The Catholic Church wants to be involved in this, to go around the world and convert all of these godless heathens. All right. Another big thing is ideology. During this time, things are shifting. It's no longer we, W-E. It's no longer about the community. In the past, the focus has been on, it's been an agricultural focus. We work together, we grow, we create, we survive. With people like Columbus and many others, it becomes more me, M-E. This idea, I want to be famous, I want to be rich, I want. So we have this shift in ideology around this time that, as you have to admit, has become a dominant ideology in the modern world. The shift from if we do good to I do good. All right. Also, this is an arms race in a lot of ways. You'll see when the Spanish do something, the British do it. When the Spanish create a better ship, the British create a better ship. The French create a better ship. When one country in Europe creates a better weapon, other countries in Europe create better weapons. They are always trying to one-up one another. They're having an arms race, right? So all of these things are some of the major reasons and have many books written about them. So we have our reasons for European expansion. The start of all this, of course, I want to give with Columbus. All right? On August the 3rd, 1492, Columbus has his first voyage. All right? So what we're going to talk about first, I am going to talk about his 4 voyages very briefly in an outline form. All right? These are, what I'm about to tell you is what is in most textbooks. All right? And then after I give you the basic outline of what is in most textbooks that most people grew up in Western civilization learning, then we're going to spend the rest of the time expanding upon that. All right? So, August the 3rd, 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? With this, we have the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, 3 of the most famous ships in world history, at least they are in the West. And with these 3 ships, Columbus first reaches the Americas. Columbus would be on the Santa Maria, and friends of his, the Pinzon brothers, would captain the other 2 ships. They would land on this trip in the Bahamas, then Cuba and Haiti. All right. With this, we get the first voyage. The second voyage occurs from September the 25th, 1493 to June the 11th, all right, 1496. This is his big voyage, 93 to 96. This is where the world is changed. All right. With this voyage, not only was he in the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, but Puerto Rico, Dominica, Jamaica, and started expanding to most of what we now think of as the Caribbean. Most of the textbooks start telling us this is, the importance of this. This is when he reintroduces the horse to the Americas. All right. Then we have 1498 and Columbus's 3rd voyage. In this one, he goes further south and ends up skirting and landing in northern South America. All right. It is in this third voyage that the textbooks tell us that Columbus figures out he has not found Asia, he has found something completely new. He has stumbled into something different. So this kind of takes us back to the story, right? But before we do that, he has one more voyage. It's in 1502. This is his fourth and final voyage to the Americas. And at this point, he lands in Central America. All right. With all of this time in the Americas from 1492 through 1502, Columbus maps this entire region very carefully. All right. To kind of ease us into the real importance and the bigger picture history of Columbus, I want to start off with impressions that he had. When I was in my 30s, I became extremely obsessed with Columbus. Right? So at this point, I was living partially in Florida and in California, and I had an entire bookshelf just full of books about Columbus, his logs, diaries, memoirs, all kinds of different things. And I started studying, really digging deep into Columbus and European expansionism. And some of the things I found in his personal writings on his trips to America, I want to share with you guys here. One of the things right here, at daybreak, great multitudes of men came to the shore, all young and of fine shapes, and very handsome. Their eyes are large and very beautiful. Here it comes. I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I pleased. All right, here's another one when he landed somewhere else. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawksbills. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them. For the Europeans, when they said bear arms, they meant guns. Things used, things that have gunpowder, right? They do not bear arms and do not know them. With 50 men, we could subjugate them and make them do whatever we want. Can you get a feel for where this is going? Another one. The natives, here comes the quote, are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. To the contrary, they offer to share with anyone. So, let's get into and talk about Columbus and the natives. All right. This is where we're going to get into myth and reality. All right. We know, to start with, in myth and reality, I want to talk about Columbus himself. All right. Traditionally, we're taught that he was born in 1451 and would die in 1506. But we're not too sure about birth. There is controversy about his birth. He could have been born even 10 years earlier, or a few years younger. So that is a So think of 1440s, later into the 1450s. Um, we do know for a fact that he did die in 1506. All right. 1506, he is one of the most famous men in Europe and one of the wealthiest men in Europe because of his voyages. And Columbus would die of gonorrhea, a sexually transmitted disease that he would acquire through his many voyages to America. All right. Gonorrhea is a horrific disease to die of, and he would die slowly from this. All right. Another thing that we are studying and think about and will wonder about is a country of birth. Most of the time, we go by the name that we have, Christopher Columbus, Cristoforo Colombo, and it's pushed that he was a Spaniard. But nobody's really sure. There's a mystery around his family's origins. We don't know his real name. Christopher Columbus came to us through his voyages, what he became famous for. He had 11 other names in Europe. When you hear that, what does that make you think about? Columbus. Christopher Columbus had 11 names throughout the different areas of Europe. That kind of makes you think AKA, also known as. And what kind of individual usually has multiple names according to where they are? Con men, thieves, criminals, all right? So we know very little about his background. As far as country of birth, where his family was from, his real name. His stories are contradictory in all of these areas. He tells lots of stories about his origins, and many of them don't match up. So, one of the things we do know, of course, it's always worked this way. He had a father and a mother. They had a kid. That's the way it works. So, with this first voyage, this is where we get a lot of the stories that you heard growing up. You know, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It talks about bad weather. It talks about a mutinous crew. It talks about the hard times of trying to survive the crossing of the Atlantic. And a lot of it really focuses on, it tells us like the crew becomes mutinous, wants to overthrow him and go back home because they've been out to sea so long. This is not true. It never happened. Sailors at this point were very used to being out to sea for a long time. Most of these men had been on, fishing ships and many other expeditionary ships. And, a month, 2, 3 was not a big deal. One of the reasons that a lot of historians push this is because this is what Columbus told them, that he had a mutinous crew and he had to convince them to keep going, making himself look heroic. Also, another thing is that Columbus doctored his logbooks of where he was actually going. And he did this because, as he said, he did not want the crew to think they had been out to sea as long as they had. He wanted to calm their fears, but that's not true as well. Because, like I said, the crew wasn't mutinous. They weren't afraid of being out to sea that long. What this was for, why he doctored his logbooks, is when he went back home, when he went back to Spain, when he went back to Europe, however you want to look at it, when people read his logbooks, whenever people would read about where he had been, they wouldn't know where he went. Only he would. This would keep wherever he went to him. All Also, we were told over and over again that Columbus proved the world was round, that Columbus discovered America, and those are the two big ones that are given over and over for you guys when you're growing up. And as we talked about in the last lecture, it's completely untrue. He did not discover the Americas, all right? And he didn't prove the world was round. The Greeks did that mathematically a long time ago. And many Europeans, most Europeans by that time, had accepted the idea that the world was round. Also, another important thing to bring into this is with Columbus in the Caribbean. On that first voyage and into the second voyage and through all of his voyages, one of the big things is his interaction and his use of the Native Americans. All right. On this first voyage, he came into contact with a group known as the Arawaks. All right. The Arawak natives were the ones in those quotes I gave you that he was describing. All right. In his first trip over, he kidnapped somewhere between 20 to 25 of them. Different journals, different memoirs, different log books, different things say differently. But he took at least 20 natives, along with foods, plants, animals, any kind of things that would be seen as riches, anything that he could take to impress the Spanish crown. Right? So once he took these things, he took them back to Europe. He paraded them before the King and Queen of Spain, which were Ferdinand and Isabella. And this gives us another little thing. Columbus had been selling this voyage for a very, very long time. Right? Columbus wanted this trip so badly. He wanted to go west to reach Asia. With this trip, he wanted to keep it to himself. He wanted to benefit from it. And he had been visiting the European monarchs for a decade trying to convince everybody to send him on this trip. Nobody would until Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. With him bringing all of this back, they were highly impressed. The gold, the jewels, the artifacts, the plants, the animals, the natives, the foods, all of these were important. They were so impressed with what Columbus had found that they give him a whole fleet of ships to head back, and that's his big voyage, right? 93 to 96, that second voyage. So with this, as he goes over and shows all of these things to the King and Queen of Spain, by the time he gets there and introduces the natives to the King and Queen, there's only 7 or 8 of them left. And this is a good representation of what happens to native culture with Columbus. Right? They are taken advantage of, and they die, usually horrible deaths. But Columbus and the Spaniards reap huge benefits from it. Right? So, with the Arawaks on the first trip, and one of the things you'll see is in the Caribbean at this time that Columbus arrived, there were 2 major tribes, the Tejano people and the Arawaks, and these would be the groups that Columbus would exploit. And on that second voyage to the Caribbean, what Columbus would do is set up an economic system. And this is another one of your key points. That system that he establishes is called, its name is encomienda. Right? This is your next key point. This is an economic system. What he and his conquistadors would do in the Caribbean, he went around mapping everything in, set everything up in sections. He set up encomiendas. To translate that into English, the best way to put it is he established plantations. All right. So Columbus spread out through the Caribbean and putting different conquistadors in different areas on these different encomiendas. And on these encomiendas, certain groups of the natives would farm the fields for food, certain groups would mine for gold, jewels, silver, those kind of things. And these were forced. These were slave plantations. These encomiendas is the introduction of slavery to the Americas by the Europeans. This is what sets up what America would think of as the plantation system and slave labor. This is one of the big importances of Columbus, is the encomienda, the plantation system. This plantation system, whether it was used by the Spaniards, the French, or the British, or whoever would use it, it would reap huge benefits. You know, after we were no longer calling ourselves French, British, or Spanish, called ourselves Americans, we still used the plantation system, slave labor. This would become huge and a major integral part of the American economy. This was established by Christopher Columbus. All right. So we have the encomienda. We have these systems that he enslaved the Arawaks and Tejanos and the other tribes that he came across in the Caribbean and around. Not only was he using them as slave labor, he sold them into sexual slavery around the world. Children, women, and some men too. Most men were used for labor, of course, but Columbus was sending these natives around the world as sex slaves as well. He was also sending natives that he would capture and didn't want in certain areas around the world as slave labor for working as well. From the numbers we have, Columbus is one of the largest slave traders, if not the largest slave trader in world history. In the European sense, the largest. All right, where the slave trade that we'll talk about through the semester, where men would gather up slaves from Africa and bring them over, they would bring a couple of boats and then retire wealthy as kings. And that would maybe get them a few hundred people that they would sell and make money off of. But Columbus traded more than 3,000 individual people into slavery. The largest slave trader in Western civilization. A little bit different importance than proving the world was round or discovering America, right? He sets up an economic system that dominates the world. The Europeans wouldn't just use that idea of the plantation system here. They'd also use it in Asia and in Africa. The Europeans would export this system, calling it many different things, and a lot of different things other than what it was: racial slavery. So, one of the things you'll also see with encomienda and the plantation system that Columbus would set up here, whether it was growing food or mining, to make the natives mind, they were horribly treated. The main punishment was usually disfigurement or death. If they did not mine the amount of gold or do the work they were supposed to do, they were disfigured. Fingers were cut off, toes were cut off, ears, noses were slit, all kinds of different punishments. But disfigurement was, and whipping, of course, were major punishments. Any time that any of these individuals would organize and try to rise up against the Europeans, they didn't have the weapons to be able to accomplish this. So these individuals would rise up in groups to try to fight off the Europeans, and the Europeans very quickly learned it was easy to put these rebellions down. An example. have an Indian uprising. A common example of how this was put down, one or two or a few soldiers would suit up. They wouldn't even use firearms. They wouldn't use anything that would that would use gunpowder, because this is a waste. They didn't really need to do it. They would put their armor on, use spears and shields on their horse, ride through and cut up and get the natives good and bloodied and broken up. And then they would sick the war hounds on. This was one of the favorite things that the Spanish did as far as putting down rebellions. The war hounds, some of the more famous stories of them, they tended to be Irish wolfhounds, very, very large dogs, somewhere between 160 to 180 pound dogs. And they would mistreat them, they would starve them, they would train them to kill. So once they got these natives good and bloody, they would set these starving dogs loose and let them tear these natives apart. We have instances of these stories from these encomiendas where the encomiadors, these conquistadors that Columbus put into charge, did whatever they wanted with these individuals. They had sex slaves. They had these tribes do everything and anything they wanted them to do. We have one example in Cuba of one of the conquistadors, the encomiador, using a man as a horse. He would have one of these native men put him up, basically, and take him piggyback around the island, around the plantation to see his plantation. These Spaniards horribly abused, raped, killed, and sold into slavery these natives. Right? The encomienda, like I told you, is a major system. With the establishment of the encomienda, this key point that you need to be focused on and look into, this establishes a plantation system that would dominate the world economy. This idea of taking wealth, of taking resources, of colonizing, colonializing, enslaving, would make the Europeans the wealthiest countries in the world. And the Americans, after, would adopt this plantation system to create its foundation. So, the reality is extremely dark. This encomienda system establishes the world economy that we're still residing in. And if you dig into it, you don't have to dig deep. You look around, the use of sweatshops and everything else. This idea of encomienda, the plantation system, of forced labor, hasn't gone away. Columbus, right? The Spaniards. Another thing to bring in is people have always wondered who the Spaniards are. Well, not just where America, the idea, the name America came from. The common idea is it came from an Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. Another one is it could have been a Welshman called Richard Amerique. The maps that would be put up by Waldseemüller, he would credit Amerigo. But there are arguments, historical arguments, to push other things. Also, with Columbus, it's just so much. There's so many different ways to go with this. To kind of give you an idea of the effect the Spaniards and then the British, the French, and everybody else would really have, that the Europeans coming into the Americas would have on the natives. When Columbus first arrived to a tiny little place called Haiti, right, he would arrive and land on a place called Labadee. Right, it's a little island off of Haiti. This is where he'd be first introduced to the Arawaks. All right, and it's at this place on Haiti that that there were 8 million Arawaks. By 1496 on Haiti, there were only 1.1 million Arawaks. If you go to 1516, when the Spanish conquistadors, the encomiadors were still there, things were still going, there were only 12,000 Arawaks still left. So think about that. Just on Haiti in the Caribbean, starts out with more than 8 million, and by 1516, only 12,000 left. You go to 1542, there are only 200 Arawaks left. If you go to 1555, a little more than 50 years into the creation of Encomienda, there are no Arawaks left on Haiti. Between being sold into slavery, used as slaves, they wiped them out. And this doesn't just happen to the Arawaks on this one little place in Haiti. It happens all over the Caribbean, all over the places that the Spanish settled. It's genocide. This is another thing that Columbus gives us. Not only does he give us the plantation system, this slave labor system which would come to dominate and create the Western civilization that we know, it also creates mass genocide. So, in the Caribbean, when they started running out of natives, and they started running out of these natives to farm the fields, do the mining, who's going to do the work? Where do the people that do the work come from? It's not a hard question to answer. I'm sure most of you have already guessed it. It's Africa. Once the native populations start dwindling to the point where they're not viable slave labor anymore, the Europeans start kidnapping, buying, and taking people from Africa, bringing them over into the Caribbean and other parts of the Americas to populate these encomiendas, to populate these plantation systems of work. All right? So you really think about this. This establishes slavery as a major economic source. Right? Not only does slavery drastically hurt and wipe out the Native Americans in the Americas, but also disease. Right? Disease plays a huge role in destroying. Remember we talked about last time, Native Americans had not domesticated animals, and they were very clean compared to Europeans, and you did not have epidemical diseases. They didn't even have the common cold here. So when the Europeans came over bringing smallpox, mumps, measles, the common cold, the flu, all these things, these were completely new to the native tribes. And it ran like wildfire. We have conquistadors in their journals write about how disease went before them and wiped out civilizations. In areas, smallpox especially, would kill 80% or more of the native population. And this would make it easy once the Europeans got there to conquer. So, disease and slavery would be tools of mass genocide. One, originally, disease was an unintended consequence, but it would be used as a form of warfare once they figured it out. But slavery was completely intentional. Columbus would get in trouble for it. The Spanish crown would punish him for creating these plantation systems because the Catholic Church said that slavery was illegal. But Columbus and the system he established was called the encomienda. They did not call it slave labor. What he did was, when he established encomienda, which is going back to our key point of encomienda, he told the men that he put on these plantations, everything in the air, everything on the land, and everything in the land is yours to use to bring wealth to the crown. Should have been a lawyer, right? He would push that he didn't create slavery. And he would be punished, sent away for a while, re-educated, but then he would be released. But the whole time, even when he was convicted of using slave labor and punished for it and convicted, the Spanish didn't stop doing what Columbus had established. So they condemned slavery. They condemned the encomienda system, but they kept using it to gain more and more wealth. He was their scapegoat. Awesome. All right. So let's get into and talk a little bit more about Columbus, right? The myths. He did not discover the Americas. He wasn't the first here. He did not prove the world was round. So the two major things that you were given growing up are completely false. However, there are very important things that he did do. All right? The realities. He is the one that would establish the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. When he started, of course, it was using Native Americans as slaves and also trading them around the world. Once the Spaniards and the Europeans would run out of natives, they would switch it and start bringing over Africans to the Americas to work on these plantations. So, one, the first importance I give you of Christopher Columbus is the establishment of the transatlantic slave trade and the plantation system. Two, genocide. This would all lead to the wiping out of the Native Americans throughout the Caribbean and all over the Americas, whether it is through slavery, conquering, or disease. You have genocide. This is another major thing that Columbus would bring. Also, trade. All of this is about trade, right? All of this is about money, honey. This is all about wealth. So Columbus changes the world. He changes the economic system of the world by establishing this new system, which would put the Europeans as the king of the hill and make them the wealthiest countries in the 20th century and the 19th century and 18th century and 17th century. You see where this is going. All right. Another thing. Columbus establishes how people treat alien cultures. In other words, cultures different from your own. And it is the idea that the Westerners have used throughout most of our history going around the world. Subjugation. How do we treat people and cultures that are different than ours? We tend to promote them and push them as savages. We tend to promote and push them as people that need our help. And then we go in and take everything they have and educate them. Also, this establishes and helps create certain groups as underclasses, especially Native Americans and Africans in the modern world. how the Europeans established that and what America would do with it after would really help establish that Africans and Native Americans were savages that were used for the benefit of civilized people. This is something that Columbus helps establish. Also, he helps establish the idea that it is okay for civilized Europeans to come in anywhere they want and take land, take wealth, take labor, take resources. It's accepted. That is not considered conquering, warfare, genocide, slavery, or anything else. It is colonization. The Europeans are coming to make you civilized. And not only that, not only are they bringing civilization with them, as far as economics, politics, and everything else, economics, politics, and religion. The Catholic Church goes everywhere with them, bringing Christianity. So, we've got a lot of things, right? It's important to remember that with this is not traditionally what we think of when we think of the melting pot. Cultures coming together and blending together and creating a new world, creating America. But it's how it happens. And this idea of cross-cultural pollination is another very big importance for Columbus. You see European influence, you see African influence, you see Native American influence. That's what makes America, are those three big things. African, Native American, and European, those three cultures blending together, coming together. This cross-cultural pollination is what makes modern America. However, it's not simple or nice, right? Two of those cultures had no choice to whether this cross-pollination occurred. All right. Some of the other things that we need to bring into this is that Columbus would bring all kinds of new things: gold, silver, all kinds of wealth, religion, disease, slavery. But Columbus changed food habits throughout the world. Kind of going to a lighter, less dark place right now. But I think it's interesting. I love food. You could probably tell. But with foods, one of the things you'll see is the Native Americans are what give the world persimmons, more than all kinds of different beans, bell peppers, hot peppers, blueberries, cranberries, corn, manioc, papayas, pineapples, pumpkins, squashes, sweet potatoes, tobaccos, tomatoes, white potatoes, wild rice. These are all crops. These are all things that Native Americans grew and ate. These are things that Columbus would take from the Native Americans and give to the world. All right? Some of the things that Columbus would bring over and change. He'd bring apples. Think about that for a minute. I'm sure you've heard as American as apple pie, right? Columbus brought apples to America. They weren't here. And what we think of as the modern apple. And actually, the modern apple comes from Marco Polo when he got it from China. The Chinese did grafting and worked on creating what would become the modern, a modern version of an apple. And it would come from those little crab apple trees originally, and it would expand into all kinds of different apples we have today. But it would start with the Chinese. So it really should be Chinese as apples, not American. So the Europeans would bring over apples, beets, cabbage, carrots, celery, cucumbers, eggplants, grapefruit, lemons, peaches. Here in the South, peaches are huge. It comes from Europeans. Plums, olives, and sugar cane. So we have all of these other things. Not only are these foods that would be brought over from the old world, you'd also see other things. All right, some of the other foods that Columbus would introduce to the world coca, peanuts, sunflowers, vanilla, avocados, pecans, and cashews. So with this trade in crops and in food, Columbus radically changes the world. Think about this. When you think about Italians, you think of pasta, right? You think of marinara sauce. So really think about that for a minute. Tomatoes. Where did tomatoes come from? The Americans. Pasta came from China. So what you think of as Italian marinara sauce and pasta actually comes from China and America. Columbus and the foods that he would bring back from the New World and that other Europeans would find throughout the world, this would create new eating customs, new foods, new everything as far as culinary ideas throughout the entire world. This would be huge. So another one of Columbus's importances. To kind of give you an idea, with disease, like I told you, it was horrific. It would wipe out large portions of the population. Most of the time, we're getting close to the point where we're going to be focusing just on North America and what would become the United States of America. And in North America, one of the things you'll see, a lot of archaeologists and historians believe there are well over 100,000, if not more, Native Americans just in North America. All right, but by 1800, by the time Thomas Jefferson would become president of the United States, from 1492 to 1800, so from basically 1500, 1600, 1700 to 1800, just in that time frame, a native population that had been well over 100 million by the time of Thomas Jefferson was less than 10 million natives. More than a 90% drop. And a lot of that has to do not only with slavery, but disease. All right. So, Columbus's importance. We've talked about quite a bit today. I've kept focused, and one of the things I really want to wrap up with is not all people were horrific. All right. I want to end with our last key point, Bartholomew de las Casas. I want to talk about Bart. All right. He was born in 1484. He would die in 1566. This man would grow up in Spanish nobility. When he would go to school, his father sent him off to college. His father wanted him to be a lawyer. He wanted to be a priest. And he ended up being both in life. Once he finished college, his father would get him a position as a conquistador, as one of the noblemen on Columbus's second voyage. So Bart would join Columbus from 1493 to 96, that big voyage where Columbus established Encomienda. Bart would come over and very, very quickly figure out that this was horrific. You remember that quote I gave you, right? Here, let's go back to the quote. Pull it up and I'll read it to you again. What we committed in the Indies stands out among the most unpardonable offenses ever committed against God and mankind, and this trade as one of the most unjust, evil, and cruel among them. So, moving us back, Bart would come over on this second voyage of Columbus in this fleet of ships. When he would get here and see how the natives was treated, how they were treated, he was completely horrified. So basically, he would jump ship and become one of the first European advocates for Native American rights. All right. Okay, to kind of give you an overview, Bart was a Spanish colonist. He was a priest. He was a founder of one of the first utopian societies in the Americas. He was the first bishop of Chiapas. He was a scholar and a historian, and he was an advocate for human rights here in the Americas. His most two famous books, one of the ones where I pulled that quote from, A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, and the other book is A History of the Indies. Bart would spend his life here in the Americas trying to help and protect Native Americans against the Spanish and the other Europeans coming in to put them in this plantation system. He is also the creator of a very important theology that would come to be a very, very important here in the Americas. It's called liberation theology. This would be a major component of the Catholic Church. You'll see that this has been a part of the Catholic Church that has been and pushed against warfare. The Catholic Church would use this and help the civil rights movement and to go against the Vietnam War. You'll see that there are several liberation theologists still to this very day. This is a very important one if you go into the Catholicism and focus in different parts of the American Southwest right now. In LA, you have several priests that push this idea of liberation theology. Liberation theology, to sum it up, it's the liberation from unjust economic, political, and social conditions. Basically, it fights for the individual, pushing against bad treatment economically, politically, and socially. It pushes that all men are equal, all women are equal, and that we should take care of and protect each other. All right. So we've got Bart, right? I know this is an extremely dark lecture. It's horrible, but this is the reality of the situation. Columbus did not prove the world was round. Columbus was not the first to discover America, but he was the one to establish encomienda, the plantation system that would come to dominate and create the modern world economy.